I thought retirement meant freedom, but then this happened. For 40 years, I woke up at 6 a.m. sharp. I brewed the same cup of coffee, wore the same tired tie, drove the same route to the same office building, and fought the same traffic both ways. I answered phones, solved problems, shook hands, signed contracts, sat through endless meetings, and dreamed every single day about the moment I could finally stop. Retirement, that golden finish line, the final lap before life truly began. Used to imagine it like a postcard. Me in a sun hat reclining on some porch in the mountains, sipping tea and reading books I never had time to read. I thought retirement would be peace. Endless mornings with nowhere to be, long lunches, quiet afternoons in the garden, maybe a few road trips, the freedom to do nothing and the time to do anything. That dream kept me going. And then, one Monday morning, unlike all the other, my alarm didn't ring. Not because I forgot to set it, but because I no longer needed it. I was officially retired. For the first time in 4 decades, I didn't have to be anywhere. No clock to race, no clients waiting, no inbox to clear. I was free, or so I thought. In those first few days, I felt light, like I'd shed a heavy coat I'd been wearing for too long. I slept in a little later, took walks, cleaned out a few drawers, rewatched movies I loved, called a few old friends to share the good news. I finally did it, I'm retired. But somewhere around the 3rd week, something strange crept in. It didn't knock, it didn't make a fuss, it just settled, like fog. I found myself staring out the window more often, wondering why the hours felt so long. The silence, once a gift, started echoing back at me. I missed the little things I used to complain about, the co-workers, the coffee runs, the back-to-back meetings, even the annoying printer that never worked. What no one tells you about retirement is that when the noise stops, the silence demands answers. And not about your job or your finances. It asks, who are you now? And that's not a question I was ready to answer. So here's the truth. Retirement didn't break me, but it broke something open. It stripped away the roles, the routines, the rush. And what it revealed? Well, that's what I want to share with you. Because I thought retirement meant freedom. But then this happened. The first Monday of retirement was bliss. I woke up when my body wanted to, not when a clock commanded me. I didn't check my phone. I didn't scramble for clean socks. I didn't scan emails before brushing my teeth. I made a slow breakfast, something with actual flavor, not the rushed slice of toast I used to eat in the car. I stood on the porch and just breathed. For the first time in years, I wasn't in a hurry. For that first week, I walked around like a man on vacation. My shoulders relaxed. My steps felt lighter. I visited the hardware store for no reason. I sat in the park and watched children play. I caught up on a few old movies, tried a new recipe or two, even started a little list of all the things I'd now have time to do. Repaint the guest room, learn how to bake sourdough, call my cousin in Arizona. It was, in every sense of the word, peaceful. But by the end of the second week, peace started to feel like stillness, and stillness started to feel like emptiness. I noticed it one morning when I finished my coffee and thought, now what? I had nowhere to go. No one waiting. No real plan for the day. That had never happened before. For decades, every hour of my day was spoken for. But now time stretched like a blank page I didn't know how to fill. The phone didn't ring much. My co-workers, once my daily lifeline, had moved on quickly. They weren't being rude, they were just busy, the way I used to be. The silence at home was heavy. My wife, still working part-time, wasn't around as much as I expected. I figured we'd be side by side all day, but she had her own rhythm, and I was now disrupting it. I started to feel invisible in my own home. There was no applause for retiring, no confetti, no big celebration beyond the farewell cake that tasted like grocery store frosting. Once the title disappeared from under my name, so did a part of my identity. No one needed me to fix anything. No one waited for my opinion. Even my grown kids, while happy for me, had their own lives. And why shouldn't they? But something inside me quietly panicked. We don't talk enough about how loud the silence can be when you've spent your life surrounded by noise. I didn't miss the stress. I missed the sense of direction, the feeling that I was in motion, that what I did that day would somehow matter. Retirement stopped all that, and when the world stopped expecting things from me, I started to question if I still mattered at all. I found myself pacing the house sometimes, opening the fridge without reason, turning on the TV just to drown out the quiet. I didn't want to admit it, but a strange loneliness was blooming. Not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from not being needed. It felt like everyone else was in a current, swimming somewhere, and I was just drifting. That was when I began to understand. It's not work we miss. It's meaning. And no one warns you how much you'll crave it when it's gone. There's this unspoken truth that most of us carry around whether we realize it or not. Our job becomes our name tag to the world. It's not just what we do, it's who we are. For decades, mine was simple. I was the guy from the office, the regional manager, the one who fixed problems, handled teams, closed deals. I wasn't just respected, I was recognized. My business card had weight. My phone calls were returned quickly. My calendar was always full. I didn't have to introduce myself twice at networking events. I had status, relevance. I mattered in conversations that shaped things, but when I retired, I lost the badge, not the plastic ID I wore around my neck. I mean the invisible one, the badge that made me feel like I belonged somewhere, that gave me a seat at the table, that said, this is who I am, and here's what I contribute. At first, I laughed it off. I thought, good riddance. No more pointless meetings, no more deadlines, no more late-night emails with urgent in the subject line. I imagined myself feeling light, liberated. But instead, I felt like someone had gently erased me from a chalkboard. One swipe, and I was gone from the day-to-day rhythm of a world that had once depended on me. And then came the question that hit harder than I expected. Who am I now? It crept up on me in small moments, like the first time someone asked, "So, what do you do?" And I stumbled. I mumbled something about being retired, tried to smile. But inside, it felt like an awkward confession. I had always had an answer to that question. Now I didn't. And the silence after that sentence, it stung more than I cared to admit. I found myself over-explaining. Well, I used to manage a team of 40, or back when I was working, we were doing major projects. I clung to the past like it could validate the present. I wasn't trying to brag. I just didn't know how else to define myself. And here's the thing. Society treats retirement like a reward, but it also treats retirees like they've stepped off stage. People stop asking for your insight. Your opinions aren't wrong. They're just unnecessary. You feel it in conversations. The younger folks nod politely, then steer the talk back to topics you no longer understand. Tech startups, crypto, influencers. It's a different language. Even my kids who love me deeply talk to me a bit differently now. I get the sense they see me as done. As if my role is to rest, reflect, and cheer them on from the sidelines. And maybe that's natural, but it still hurt more than I expected. What no one tells you is that retirement can feel like exile. Not from people, but from purpose. I remember one day walking past the mirror and barely recognizing the man looking back at me. No suit, no polished shoes, no urgency in his eyes. Just a man in sweatpants with nowhere to be. I smiled, but it felt thin, because behind that smile was a question I didn't know how to answer. What is my value now? If you've ever felt this, like your worth was tied to what you did, not who you are, let me tell you, you're not alone. It's one of the most quietly painful parts of aging that no one prepares you for. You don't just walk away from a job, you walk away from a version of yourself. And that grieving process, it's real, it's deep, and it's necessary. Because the truth is, you can't move forward until you mourn who you were. Only then can you start to discover who you still might become. Freedom was the promise. It was the prize at the end of a long, weary road. I had spent years imagining how beautiful it would feel to finally be free from meetings that ran too long, from bosses who misunderstood me, from traffic jams, performance, reviews, and deadlines. I wasn't just chasing rest, I was chasing space. Space to breathe, to think, to be. And for a short time, that's exactly what retirement gave me. But no one told me that even freedom could feel heavy, that it could sting, that it could grieve. Grief isn't always about death. Sometimes it's about the quiet, invisible endings we don't know how to name, the ones people don't send sympathy cards for. And for me, the grief came not with loss of life, but with the loss of structure. I missed the rhythm of my old life, not because it was perfect, but because it was familiar. There was a built-in urgency to the way each day unfolded, a sense that I was part of something, that my presence made a difference. When that rhythm disappeared, I didn't just lose my schedule, I lost my anchor. Waking up at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday used to sound like luxury. But without a reason to be up, the morning didn't feel like a beginning. It just felt like an extension of the night before. Meals had no urgency. Days blurred together. I remember once standing in the kitchen trying to recall what day it was. Wednesday? Saturday? It didn't matter, and that scared me more than I expected. And when time starts to stretch like that, something inside you starts to wilt. I began to feel foggy, slower, not physically, but mentally. The sharpness I prided myself on had dulled. I forgot names in the middle of stories, lost my train of thought during phone calls. It wasn't alarming at first, just frustrating. But over time, I realized my brain had lost its workout. Without problems to solve or challenges to face, it had started to drift. And with it, so had I. There's also a kind of emotional ache that settles in. A grief for being out of the loop. Friends still working would talk about their busy weeks, their projects, their wins and losses. I listened politely, nodded along, even gave advice when asked. But I was no longer part of the game. I had become a spectator, cheering from the sidelines, uninvited to the huddle. And there was a loneliness in that. Not the kind you feel when you're by yourself, but the kind you feel when you're surrounded by people who don't quite see you the same way anymore. I grieved the sense of being needed, of being the one who had answers, who could fix things, who had responsibilities. I didn't expect that to be such a loss, but it was. When people stop needing you, it's easy to feel like you've stopped counting. Even physically, my body seemed to shift. I was moving less, and it showed. The soreness in my back, the stiffness in my knees. I wasn't aging faster. I was just using myself less. Retirement hadn't broken my body, but the sudden stillness had startled it. And through all of this, I kept wondering, why am I not happier? I was free. I had time. I had saved, planned, prepared. This was supposed to be the good part. But emotionally, it felt like I had lost more than I had gained. That's the part they don't put in the retirement brochures. Freedom sounds beautiful when you're chained to a desk. But true freedom, the kind where no one is asking anything of you, is also the freedom to disappear quietly, to feel forgotten, to wake up one day and realize you haven't really felt alive in weeks. Grief isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers. It slips into your morning coffee, into the quiet afternoons, into the long walks with no destination. It shows up when you start wondering if you'll ever feel essential again. And yet, underneath that grief was something else. Something smaller but stubborn. A flicker. A hint that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of something meaningful, but the beginning of something I hadn't yet discovered. I just didn't know what it was yet. We're sold an idea of retirement that looks like a dream. Long beach walks, quiet mornings with a paper and coffee, finally picking up that guitar or painting again, traveling with no return date. And yes, those moments can be real. But what no one tells you, what no one dares to say out loud, is that retirement is also a profound emotional adjustment, one that doesn't arrive with flashing lights or grand warnings. but instead shows up quietly in the ordinary moments of your new life. What they don't tell you is that time, when it's no longer a scarce resource, can become overwhelming. All those years we begged for more hours in the day, suddenly we have them, and we don't always know what to do with them. There's a strange paradox. When you're working, an empty calendar sounds like paradise. But when every day is a blank page, the lack of structure can feel paralyzing. You find yourself making lists just to feel productive. You water plants that don't need watering. You recheck the mail even though you already brought it in. Time stretches, and without shape it loses meaning. No one warns you how different your relationships will feel either. Friends you used to see every day at work slowly fade into the background. You realize how many of those connections were built on convenience and proximity, not true friendship. You send a few texts in the first few weeks, maybe grab coffee, but the calls get fewer. Their lives are still filled with meetings and deadlines. Yours is not, and the separation grows. Even with your spouse, if you're married, things shift. Suddenly you're both in the same space all day long. And while that might sound romantic, the truth is, you've both gotten used to your routines. Now you're stepping into each other's rhythms. One person wants silence, the other wants to talk. One likes the house a certain way, the other has new habits now. It's not about conflict, it's about adjustment. Sometimes it feels like you're learning how to live together all over again. No one warns you about the guilt either. The guilt of not feeling grateful enough, of not feeling happy when you're supposed to be. You hear yourself say, "I should be enjoying this," while feeling oddly restless or sad. And it's confusing, because wasn't this the goal, the reward for all those years? Why does it feel like something's missing? Another truth. People stop checking in as often, not because they don't care, but because you've become, in their minds, settled, stable, retired. You no longer need to vent about the boss or ask advice about a promotion. You're not in the loop anymore, and it's hard to explain how much that stings until it happens. No one talks about the way your sense of urgency disappears, and with it sometimes your sense of importance. When every day looks the same, it's easy to put things off. You'll read that book tomorrow, visit that friend next week, fix that thing later. And slowly, a certain stillness creeps in. Not the peaceful kind, the stagnant kind. And you don't notice it at first. But then a month passes, then two. And you realize you haven't done any of the things you thought you would. Here's what they also don't warn you about. You have to reinvent yourself. Retirement isn't just a pause. It's not a rest stop. It's a brand new chapter. And chapters need direction, characters, conflict, even purpose. You can't just exit your working life and expect to feel whole. You have to enter your retired life with intention, with curiosity, with humility even. It's not about filling your time with distractions. It's about discovering what genuinely gives your time value now. And that takes work. A different kind of work, the internal kind. So if you're sitting in your kitchen wondering why you feel off, even though everything looks like it's supposed to be perfect, know this. You're not broken. You're just human. And you're going through something no one ever trained you for. Retirement doesn't come with a roadmap. But once you stop expecting it to feel like a vacation and start treating it like a rebirth, that's when things begin to shift. That's when the grief gives way to growth. And that's when freedom begins to feel less like a void and more like a canvas. I didn't wake up one morning and have it all figured out. There was no grand epiphany, no light beaming down from the sky. It was more like a series of small, almost invisible moments, each one tugging gently at me, asking me not to give up, but to look again. It started with something simple. A neighbor needed help fixing a broken step on her porch. I hadn't used my toolbox in months, but I said yes without thinking. And as I knelt there, hammering a stubborn nail into place, something clicked. No pun intended. I felt useful. Just for a moment. I had a job, a task, a reason to be exactly where I was. It felt good, so I started saying yes to more things. A community cleanup day, an invitation to speak at a local high school about leadership. A friend of a friend needed help reviewing a small business plan. I wasn't paid, I wasn't on any clock. But the strange thing was, I felt more alive than I had in months. That's when it hit me. I hadn't missed my career. I had missed contributing. See, we talk about retirement like it's a reward for a life of effort, a long stretch of rest. But for people who've spent their lives building, fixing, serving, leading, it can feel more like a removal, like we've been benched. But we're not done, we're just different. And freedom? It's not the absence of responsibility, it's the presence of choice. Once I stopped asking, what do I do now? And started asking, what matters to me now? Everything changed. I joined a small volunteer group that visited elderly folks in assisted living facilities. Some were just a few years older than me, but completely alone. We'd sit and talk, share stories, laugh, sometimes cry. They reminded me that connection isn't about age, it's about attention and showing up and listening. I started mentoring younger professionals too, people just starting out, unsure of themselves. They asked questions I used to have the answers to, and suddenly I found I still did. My experience hadn't expired, it just needed a new audience. Even my mornings began to feel different. I didn't need an alarm to feel purpose anymore. I woke up knowing I had somewhere to be, someone to encourage, something to give. I even got back into writing, nothing fancy, just reflections like this one, notes to myself, to anyone who might need them. My relationships deepened too. My wife and I had new conversations, not about errands or bills, but about dreams, about the next chapter. We started cooking meals together, slow meals, laughing when things burned or boiled over. That quiet tension from before, it eased, because I had found something outside of her to energize me again, and that space gave us both room to breathe. And here's the truth I discovered. The greatest freedom in retirement isn't in doing nothing. It's in finally choosing to do only what means something to you. When I was working, time was money. Now time is memory, it's presence. It's that walk I take without checking the clock. It's the phone call I make just to say hello. It's the letter I write to a grandchild, knowing they'll one day treasure it more than any gift. I used to think retirement was the end of my productive life, but I've learned it's the beginning of my intentional life. I'm not filling my days now. I'm shaping them with purpose, with attention, with love. So no, I didn't get the freedom I imagined. I got something better. A kind of freedom that's quieter, yes, but deeper, truer. It's not about escaping responsibility. It's about finally choosing what's worth being responsible for, and that kind of freedom, it doesn't retire. It renews. If you'd asked me years ago what I thought retirement would feel like, I would have given you a picture-perfect answer. Calm mornings, long lunches, quiet afternoons, maybe a little travel, a hobby or two. And in some ways, I got all of that. But what I didn't expect, what no one really prepares you for, is how retirement would crack me open. I thought retirement would be a long exhale. And for a moment it was. But that exhale was followed by a silence so loud it demanded answers I'd never had to give before. Who am I when I'm no longer useful? What do I do with myself when no one's asking anything of me? Where do I find meaning when the world stops keeping score? These are not small questions. They sneak up on you in the stillness, and they linger. But somewhere along the way, I stopped resisting them. I stopped trying to recreate my old life in a slower format. I stopped measuring my worth by how many hours I worked, how many people needed me, how full my calendar was. I started looking for something different, something quieter, something deeper. And that's when I found the real gift of retirement. It wasn't freedom from work. It was freedom to discover who I was without it. It was the freedom to slow down, not just physically, but spiritually, to notice the details I'd rushed past for decades. The way the sunlight slants through the window in late afternoon, the feel of warm coffee in a quiet house, the sound of my wife humming as she chops vegetables in the kitchen. These things aren't loud. They don't announce themselves. But they are sacred. It was the freedom to reconnect, With friends, with family, with parts of myself I hadn't spoken to in years. The young dreamer, the curious learner, the gentle man who didn't always have to be in charge but could still be strong in softer ways. And it was the freedom to be present, really present, not distracted, not rushing, not halfway here, but all in. Whether I was helping a neighbor fix a fence or simply sitting in the backyard watching the birds, my time was finally mine again. Not to kill, but to live. I realized that retirement isn't the end of usefulness. It's the beginning of intentional usefulness. You're not done, you're just free to choose now. And that choice? That's powerful. So if you're standing on the edge of retirement or already in it and wondering why it doesn't feel like you thought it would, take heart. The discomfort, the quiet, even the grief, they're not signs that you're failing. They're signs that you're transitioning, that something old is ending, yes, but that something beautiful is waiting to begin. You haven't lost your value. You've just been invited to redefine it. And once you do, once you stop mourning what was and start embracing what could be, retirement becomes more than a finish line. It becomes a doorway to presence, to purpose, to peace, to you. That's the real gift of retirement, and it's waiting for you too.